The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own and does not represent legal or accounting advice or counsel and should not be seen as such. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only. We make no promises or assertions on how this information will impact your business, your personal life, or financial well-being. The information relayed does not imply endorsement or offer opposition to any specific organization, product, or services. Welcome to SHifT. I'm your host, Lori Power, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'm really pleased to be speaking with Matthew Langsford, Wealth Management and Senior Investment Advisor and Portfolio Manager. He's a fellow CEPA, so obviously I'm very interested in his point of view when it comes to exit and transition. Recently, Matthew's become an accredited family enterprise advisor as well. He's certified through the Family Enterprise Exchange. You have a lot to offer your clients, but let's start at the beginning, Matthew. Can you tell me a little bit about your work history and why you've really taken this road?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lori. I'd love to provide a little bit more detail and context to how I, evolved into being, not only a wealth advisor, but a business transition coach. So I guess it all started, maybe, about 5, 6 years ago when, I did a real deep analysis of my business on the wealth side and recognized that I was working with a lot of business owners and their families. And, you know, recognize that they were facing certain challenges the average client or household didn't have to deal with, namely they oftentimes had a business that consumed a lot of their life and time and effort and money. It was if not the largest, certainly one of the largest line items on their personal net worth or balance sheet. And they were struggling through the transaction to sell or succeed the business. So that was my observation. And, that sort of piqued my curiosity, and also, got me down the road of trying to identify, where were the main pain points for business owners looking to transition their business through sales succession at some point in time. So that's really where it started. The genesis was really observing who ended up being our primary clients within my wealth business and trying to solve for some of their issues, right? Particularly around business sale. So that's really where it started. So to your point, the first step was to get better educated on some of these items. So became a family enterprise advisor a number of years ago, which really provided a framework for working within a family business, which is unique in the sense that you have that family dynamic always at play that you need to be mindful of. So that was helpful, but I really was looking for more of a methodology around how can we actually build a process to help these business owners best prepare for an exit, on their terms, on their timeline. And so that was really the certified exit planning advisor certification, which you and I shared together, that really got me to that point. And since then, we've actually launched this as a separate vertical within our wealth practice. And it's under the business transition coach name. And we're working actively with business owners every day about getting them prepared on a personal, financial, and business level for an eventual successful exit.
A couple of things that I come across when I'm talking to business owners, my clients, is we always say in the CEPA world, right, that you want to make succession planning part of the business plan.
Yeah.
However, many times that's the folly, right? And we come across that brick wall because people don't want to let people view under the sheet, if you would, right?
Yeah.
They may not be ready. Their identity hasn't been taken care of. How do you first maybe relax your customers into talking about succession planning and ease them into where they need to go?
So I think it all starts with, help better educating them on what's the task at hand here. Like, what does it involve to actually, prepare and go to market and sell a business? So educating them, creating awareness, around not only the exit planning process, but more importantly, like, where some of their gaps are, right? And explaining, how those gaps can really impact not only the value of their business on a sale, but more importantly, whether their business is even sellable, right? So, we oftentimes will, use the example of the company that's in their industry, similar type of company, doing a similar type of EBITDA or profit. Yet, one business sells for 3 times EBITDA, the other business sells for 6 times, right? So, why? And so trying to educate them around the fact that, upwards to 80% of a company's value can be attributed back to what we call intangible capitals in the business, right? So, the profit's the profit, the revenue's the revenue. You can strike a valuation off that, but really the companies that are best in class that go out for a premium multiple, what are they doing different? And I think that the whole focus on these intangible capitals is absolutely paramount, right? And so things like human capital, right? Your people, the social capital, your culture, for example, customer capital, the breadth of your customer base, and of course, structural capital being a big one, which is the processes you've built out and incorporated and documented in your business so that you build a transferable business. So I guess you start with education and awareness, and then, part of that is the intangible capitals conversation. We'll also explore that concept around whether the business is even sellable today. And that often catches the business owner off guard. But when you explain the fact that, you've built some value in this business, but can you actually transfer it to a buyer? Have you built a leadership team or a succession plan to allow for that? And the often answer is no, or at best, maybe. So stuff like that is kind of where we'll start the conversation, not to shock anybody, but to really kind of wake them up a little bit about the fact that, it's not as easy as putting your business up for sale and you'll have, buyers lining up to buy your business. It's a little bit more difficult than that.
I've probably said way too many times on this show that one of our banes, when working with transition and exit planning, is when customers or clients will say, well, somebody's going to buy it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, who is that somebody? And if you've already identified them, let's write that down and build it into part of the plan. And
Yeah.
does this organization or person know that you have targeted them for purchasing your company, and are they able financially to handle and address all that comes along with purchasing your business? What do some of those tough conversations look like when you're having them with your customers?
Yeah. So listen, I think there is unfortunately, that belief that, I'll just deal with this, leading up to the sale a couple months before, and, we'll put this business up for sale, we'll sell it, and everybody's gonna be happy. Reality doesn't work like that. I'd say that's an outlier type of situation. More often than not, what happens is if the planning hasn't been done to get yourself personally ready, right? So for example, what does that mean? Well, it means if you haven't thought about how you're going to spend the next the 70 hours a week that you're putting in the business, doing something productive that gives you fulfillment, then you're going to have a problem probably giving up the business, right? And you're going to find a reason not to sell the business, likely at the 11th hour. We've seen that play out. And even if you're successful selling the business, the life that you've created for yourself post exit, isn't what you aspired for, right? So I think, the tough conversation up front is, and we've changed our approach because again, observing within my own client base over the years, the business owners who did spend the time thinking about what life after the exit would look like, how they're spending the time, their experience after the sale versus clients who didn't do that work. And it was such a material difference that we said, okay, listen, let's start the conversation with, what does the next chapter look like? What does your second act in life look like? And start to build that. So it actually gives them something to run towards versus away from. I think that's super important. And then once you've got alignment on that personal sort of goal or vision, then a lot of the stuff around, the financial planning and the business planning and what type of exit makes sense and, all that stuff just naturally starts to fall into place.
I'm really curious as a financial advisor and a wealth advisor, and the history of your firm and being very good and at doing these items, do you see sometimes that the business owner, in fact, when they think about their retirement or they think about their next or their exit, they in fact treat themselves not as the business owner, the entrepreneur that they've been most of their lives, but they actually treat themselves like an employee. And then they go, well, I have this investment and I have, my RSP, and I have, a TFSA. And when they're trying to do it themselves, like entrepreneurs do, right? They're very self-sufficient and they think that's enough.
Yeah.
What does that conversation look like as we straddle the financial and the wealth and the business?
Yeah. So this is where sort of the wealth piece of my business intersects with the business transition piece in a meaningful way. So, I'd say that, we take a planning first approach on the wealth side. So before we, would recommend any type of investment solution, for example, we want to understand, what the goals and objectives and constraints are for our clients. But part of our process would be to identify, the assets and liabilities on our clients' personal balance sheet. And inevitably, if they're business owners, that business does represent a meaningful part. As I said, we've seen upwards to 80% or more of, the financial makeup of our clients would be in this one e-liquid private business. So, I think you start by kind of providing some context there, right? And that sort of gets them focused on the importance of making sure that, this asset gets monetized successfully in the future. Then from there, I think the biggest thing I find, concerning, I guess, when we get engaged with business owners is that they don't often know what their business is worth. Like they haven't really ascribed a true value to what they've built today. So one of the early stage sort of deliverables we'll work with a client is actually getting them some form of business valuation done. And these aren't, the business valuations done, to satisfy a buy-sell agreement or a tax strategy. These are actually meant to be as real time as possible, range of value to give them some perspective on what they have today. And so, I think that's super important, to ensure that they understand, the importance of getting this right, where it sits in their overall financial makeup, and then start to build some additional insights from there.
I think where your firm really has a leg up to, Matthew, is that you've trained your clients or you've educated your clients to know that, wealth grows over time, plans happen over time, and being able to work with your clients through that transition and knowing that it's going to take time to go and reach the end goal. And I like the way you had said that, run toward it instead of away from it.
Hmm.
How do you deal with the fatigue that comes along with perhaps they have an interested buyer and that buyer falls off?
Yeah.
Or, now we have somebody else who might be an investment firm that is interested in working with the company, but only partially.
Yeah.
What kind of, and I think this is where your family advisory would come into play as well, because there's going to be a family behind this business owner. How do you work with that fatigue and get them through those hurdles?
Yeah. So listen, I mean, even with the best preparation possible, going through a sale transaction is going to be difficult. It's going to be maybe one of the most difficult things a business owner will do in their lifetime on a lot of levels, right? But just the actual process of transferring this business to a buyer, is not easy. So, we're not going to say that, the planning is going to make this, a snap, but what it will do is it will take away some of the friction and it'll better prepare, because if you know what's coming, right? So if you educate the business owner on what's possible, in a transaction, then they're emotionally better prepared to deal with, some of the unknowns that ultimately come up, right? So I'll give you an example. Like, one of the things I recognized early on was the value of bringing in somebody who actually does these transactions for a living. So we work with a number of boutique, very high quality M&A advisory groups. And those groups are wonderful, resources to educate the clients on the finer details around how a transaction happens, to put them in the seat of the potential buyer, and really understand that, a lot of times, the deal that you originally agreed to in the LOI stage, it's going to change, right? And it may fail, and this is just part of that process. We just had a client recently, who went to market, second generation business in the SaaS software business, great business, but they had enough. They've been doing it really since they were kids. They've been in the family business, so it was the right time to sell. So they went to market, and they had a very large strategic at the table, premium valuation, and in the 11th hour, the deal fell apart. But the consolation prize in that case was another company, which was second in the running, ended up, in our opinion, being even a better partner, because the terms they were really willing to agree to, which was only a 3-month stay on for the owner, all cash deal, little bit of escrow, but no earnout component. It was actually a better deal. So, being able to help that client manage the emotions through that process was important, but we already kind of prepped them by talking to this M&A advisor early in the planning process about what possibly and probably will happen. So it wasn't a surprise, is my point.
I like that a lot, because I think that that's the difference between success and failure as you go through this process, is preparing the business owner from the onset about the realities
Yeah.
that are going to come down the road. Now, valuation is one thing, and you get the business valued probably at the onset, after and just prior to being able to work through a deal. Tell
Mhm.
me about positioning. Positioning is different than evaluation. So take me through the positioning.
So by positioning in terms of how we would, I guess, express, the business valuation details, or maybe give me a little more context there, Lori, if you don't mind.
The readiness, the
Oh,
positioning of the business, the readiness of the owner
yeah.
to start working it, making sure that their systems, their organization, their structure, so
Yeah.
that somebody can come in and look at that with an intent to purchase.
Yeah. So again, like, we wanted to provide something tangible at onset that allows, the business owner and the advisor to look at all that stuff up front. And so we have a business readiness assessment questionnaire, which leads to a report, and that report has 5 different, I guess, areas of preparedness that would be required to be successful on a transaction, and kind of scores each area, and then comes up with a total sort of readiness score. So, what it does is it starts the conversation around, okay, like, what are we doing right, and where do we have gaps, right, in our planning? So that's kind of where we start. And then, as we go through a conversation around that piece, it often leads into the need to actually create some baseline valuation for the business. And it's so important to do that early. And this is kind of where, again, like, we lead with a discussion around, what do you want your life to look like post exit now? And that's by trial and error with clients, and recognizing that that's kind of the guiding light. Same thing happened with, where we would position the business valuation. It was later in the process originally, and we brought it right up to the front along with the assessment. And the reason we've done that is because if you don't know in some way, shape, or form what your business is worth, you're going to have a real hard time doing some of the other planning required, right? So that's where we start. So we'll provide a baseline value. What does that do? Well, number one is it sets realistic expectations, right? So, I've had situations, unfortunately, where, clients were maybe sold on, a multiple for their business that wasn't reasonable. Um, and went down that road unsuccessfully, and frustrating exercise to boot. So knowing kind of where your business sits today in terms of value is important. The second thing is, you should be able to identify how you compare to the best in class operators in your industry. So, looking at, what the best in class operators generate in terms of profit margin, for example, right? How they've successfully traded at a premium valuation because they've spent time building out those intangible capitals I talked about earlier. And helping them recognize that, hey, listen, like, you know, 3 times your EBITDA is kind of where you would sit today. But there's companies in your industry that have gone out at 6 times or double, right? And so understanding that, and kind of showing them what we call the value gap, i.e. the money they're leaving on the table, super important. And that's, again, part of that initial valuation process. And then I'd say that the third, thing that what's really important about that part of it is, you've got to protect the value that you've created, right? So too often, we'll start to dig a little deeper, and sometimes recognize that there's a shareholder agreement with a buy-sell provision in it, but that buy-sell provision is not funded. So, all this great planning is going on to try and prepare for a business sale, but what if the lightning bolt strikes, and somebody dies, or becomes disabled, or there's a death or divorce or something to that effect? How does that impact the ability to sell the business? So let's protect the value today, and whether that's through insurance or otherwise, there's different tools you can use to do that, as opposed to being exposed leading to that sale, right? So these are all things that I think are, important steps that we do early on now.
I think it's so important that you take the time to walk them through that next goal. What are they going to transition into? And you identify that wealth gap,
Mhm.
because as you protect the value of the company until you get to that sale, you also have to protect that wealth to allow them to do the next. And I would believe, without putting words in your mouth, that that is where your firm, being that financial advisory and wealth advisory firm, you're just pulling all of those pieces of the puzzle together for the best interest of the client.
Absolutely, right. So we're obviously well versed. We have an inside planning team that can run a retirement plan or projection. Identify what that wealth gap is, number one, and wealth gap's a little bit of a different way to get into the same place, in the sense that in our world as CEPAs, we call it the wealth gap, because what we want to do is identify what they need to sell their business for to reach their long-term retirement and life goals. But at the end of the day, it's really trying to identify what the gap is in the savings, or the assets they have today funding retirement and their legacy, versus what they actually need. So I think that's super important. And knowing that number allows you to make some better decisions leading into a sale. An example would be, a lot of times, business owners are head down, constantly reinvesting in the business, which is great. But, that's where you lead to a situation where that business is now represents 80% of your personal net worth. And I'd argue that's not a healthy position to be in for anybody. I mean, I think even if you had 80% of your net worth in a blue chip liquid stock, that would be problematic by most accounts. So certainly, given the fact that it's a liquid private business, hammers that home. And then, so that's super important to just acknowledge, that part of it. And then, of course, once we've kind of figured that out, we want you to maybe start harvesting a little bit more from the business, putting that into your personal side of the financial ledger, if you will, and de-risk your personal balance sheet a little bit heading into a sale. And the reason for that is, that's going to provide you with other options. So again, real life example is when we've gone through that exercise with business owners and they built a nice nest egg outside of the business. When they go to sell the business, they can look at different options like a partial sale, right? So it doesn't have to be all or none. They don't have to sell 100% of the business because they've done a good job of accumulating wealth outside the business. So they can sell, part of the business today, oftentimes bring in some growth capital from a third party buyer to grow the business further. And then at some point, all exit together and get what we call the second bite at the apple. We've had a number of those play out, and that's actually my preference if it's possible. But if you're a business owner and you've got everything tied up into the private business, you don't have that option. So I guess it's our approach is to try and provide as much flexibility and options as possible down the road through our planning first approach.
I have a twofold question for you, and thinking about it as somebody just entering, a new entrepreneur, perhaps that entrepreneur who has just purchased the business and they've gone through, but from the other side. And then the person who might be, midway through their business and succession still feels like a long way away.
Yeah.
Both of those instances, what are the questions that they should ask themselves? What's the one question that you would like business owners to ask to get them interested in making that plan, taking that first step to make that plan?
I think you got to ask yourself, are you exit ready today? Period. Right. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times there's, especially in this environment where there's been a lot of money raised on the financial buyer side, the private equity side over the years, where there's a lot of interest there. A lot of strategics are now looking at bolt-on acquisitions. So the point is, you might just get an unsolicited offer, right? So if you get an unsolicited offer, how do you evaluate that if you're not educated or prepared to go down that road? But more importantly, I think you need to always be ready to potentially transact. And if you think about it, a transition ready business is a more valuable business, right? So either way, whether it's a year from now or 5 years from now or 10 years from now, or maybe your plans to succeed the business to your kids one day, focusing on the principles of getting a business ready for an exit or transition, those are just principles that lead to a more valuable business and a better operating business. So I just think they make sense regardless of your timeline or where you are in sort of the business owner cycle.
That is a wonderful, and I know I'll cut that out. Sorry about that. I like that. That's a good closer. Any last words as we come to the end of time?
Yeah, I would say, I think it's super important to recognize that, a good exit plan requires a good exit planning team. And, it's really important to spend the time and effort and quite honestly, the money on making sure you have the right professional team to help you through this journey. And so I would say that's an important thing to consider. And also understand that, there's a way to incrementally get to a point where you're in an exit ready position, and it doesn't happen overnight. So, just start the process, I guess, would be the biggest message here, and get going on this important work.
What's the question I haven't asked you that I should have asked?
I guess maybe, like the I guess what we view as kind of the ideal process, right? And so we've kind of looked at it and recognize that business owners are really busy, and they're usually working in their business, not on their business. But our process is, I think, very manageable, where if you decide to work with us on a business transition coaching basis, it's a once a month call, one-on-one, We'll take you through different modules meant to get you to a complete business transition plan. And some of our clients get through it in 6 months because they're really highly motivated and they've been able to carve out a bit more time. Other clients have taken, 24 months, right? So the point there is, we recognize that, business owners are going to go at the pace that they want to, and what's reasonable based on the other commitments in their life. So our process adapts to that and adds value over time through those one-on-ones and those different deliverables.
It has been a pleasure having a conversation with you, and I hope that we can continue this conversation.
Thank you, Lori. I appreciate you having me.